Okay, so thank you to Glenn Hurowitz from CEO and founder of Mighty Earth, which is a global advocacy organization looking to protect the earth and the climate. And we're going to talk about how agriculture and deforestation is a big part of the work of Mighty Earth. So thank you, Glenn, for coming on to the program. Could you just sort of introduce yourself briefly and tell us a little bit more about Mighty Earth?
Sure. Mighty Earth is a global advocacy organization working to protect nature and climate. We tackle the biggest issues that aren't getting sufficient attention. We've had a major focus on transforming the private sector, where we see having a lot of potential, even where governments aren't doing their job. And we're about 10 years old.
Okay, and so are some of the big projects that you have ongoing there at Mighty Earth at the moment?
So we work to tackle, as I said, the biggest issues that aren't getting sufficient attention. So first and foremost amongst those is nature itself, and that is because the extinction crisis, if anything, is even more severe than the climate crisis, but is also a big solution to the climate crisis. So nature represents about 37% of the solution to climate change by regrowing forests and other ecosystems that can suck gigatons of carbon out of the atmosphere. But yet it just gets less than 3% of the funding. So, at a core level, we're trying to redress that balance. Our flagship campaign is transforming the meat industry. Meat causes more deforestation than the rest of agriculture combined. It causes more climate pollution than all the cars, trucks, ships, and planes in the world put together. I often say that EVs are a big deal, but the meat industry is an even bigger deal. And we're finally, we're trying to drive a shift to regenerative practices, and ultimately over time shift from industrial meat towards animal-free protein that has a way lower footprint on the planet.
Okay, so is a lot of your work at the moment in South America, in Brazil, and around that area, or is it global?
Our work is global, and I should say beyond the meat industry, we work on other important issues too, like breaking the link between agricultural expansion and deforestation in Southeast Asia and the Congo Basin for things like palm oil, paper, and rubber. We work on industrial decarbonization. We work on rewilding, bringing back keystone carnivores like mountain lions here in North America. And I'm really proud of all of that work. And it includes some models like in Southeast Asia. We've been able to play a big role in driving a 90% decline in commercial deforestation there. That provides a model for the meat industry. But we're working in the meat industry across the Americas. So both to stop the destruction of the Amazon and other ecosystems in South America that's primarily driven by the meat industry, but also their impacts in North America, which is a huge meat agricultural producer in general, and meat producer in particular. We're seeing massive amounts of methane production here, methane emissions here from cattle. The Mississippi River, Gulf of Mexico, Chesapeake Bay are fouled by pollution pouring into those rivers from meat and feed production. And so we really see this as kind of an America's wide effort, and it's global in the sense that while most meat is produced in the Americas, markets are in Europe, in Asia, and elsewhere. And so we're working to tackle that all around the world so we can really drive industry transformation.
Okay, so are you sort of a lobbying organization? Do you kind of work in Washington, whispering in the ears of politicians, or are you sort of a kind of on the ground, sort of getting your hands dirty?
Well, we like to say we're a perfect storm organization. So we kind of do it all. I mean, we set a target of, there's a very big picture target. In this case, breaking the link between agriculture and deforestation, a millennia old problem, and also dramatically reducing the environmental impact of the protein that we consume, which is, meat is $1 trillion a year industry. So it's big, and that's not going to just require one tactic. So, we are based, our headquarters are in Washington, D.C., but we have staff all over the world. We do do some lobbying where it's possible. I wouldn't say Washington is a particularly receptive place to environmental protection at the moment. But certainly we talk to government officials wherever we can and wherever it'll make a difference. I think for some time, tragically, governments aren't doing enough to protect nature and climate. The job still has to be done. Like the climate crisis isn't disappearing. The extinction crisis hasn't gone away just because politicians aren't paying sufficient attention to it. Indeed, I mean, I have never lived through a time where I have experienced politicians, not just in the United States, especially in the United States, but around the world, who care less about environment as they do right now. And so we have had, as I mentioned, for a long time, a focus on the private sector because paradoxically, the very industries and companies that are historically most responsible for bulldozing rainforests or driving outsized pollution are also best positioned to solve those challenges. They have the supply chains; they can reach hundreds of thousands or millions of farmers on the ground. If they can be convinced that adopting a pro-environment policy is good for the bottom line or necessary to hang on to their markets or grow their markets, they can drive huge shifts, almost regardless of what government does.
Mm. Have you found that some of the companies, the likes of Cargill and JBS or sort of Danone and some Nestle companies like that, have they been less receptive under the new administration? Have they changed their policies at all? I heard somebody say to me that the word sustainability has become toxic.
I think it's a bit hard to generalize because even amongst the companies that you mentioned, there's been a very different range of reactions. So I think that broadly speaking, on the issues that we work on, we see companies continuing to drive and implement their sustainability commitments, and indeed we see some big ones adopting new ones. Just this morning, Marfrig, the world's second largest cattle company, announced that it had established traceability, figuring out wherever all the cows in its supply chain come from, both from its direct suppliers and indirect suppliers. That's a huge breakthrough, and really throws down the gauntlet to other large meat companies like JBS and Cargill and others to deliver Minerva to deliver the same. And we're continuing to see other positive examples like that. Marfrig, just announced a big commitment, precedent-setting commitment to reduce its methane footprint by 30% by 2035, which is also a big deal and also throws down a gauntlet to the others. And they're not the only ones. On the other hand, we certainly have seen some companies retreat from their previous commitments. I think in our universe, the worst example of this recently is Cargill, Bunge, other major agricultural colossi that sit astride our food systems have retreated from their own most successful conservation effort in history, the Amazon soy moratorium. In 2006, under pressure from campaigns from environmental groups in Europe, especially McDonald's and other companies, forced their suppliers to stop sourcing animal feed that was linked to deforestation in the Amazon. Within 3 years, deforestation for soy, which is the primary animal feed, plummeted to near zero levels. And this system of monitoring has remained intact, and it's estimated that it's conserved at least 17,000 square kilometers across the Amazon. It has been probably the single most successful, transparent effort by the private sector to conserve forests in history. It's been an environmental economic win-win. So not only have they dramatically reduced deforestation for soy in the Brazilian Amazon, but they've also expanded the area planted with soy in that ecosystem by 6 million plus acres, because what those policies did was they forced them to channel that expansion onto previously deforested, degraded lands instead of pristine ecosystems. And so it's been this huge environmental economic win-win in place for 20 years, operating smoothly. And the soy traders themselves, in league with very anti-environment politicians in some Brazilian states, started launching legal and political attacks on it. And at the beginning of this year, tragically, they used that as an excuse to abandon it. And so I don't think that would be possible if nature was higher on the agenda for politicians right now. Um, I also think, though, that this is an example of an issue where we're counting on the private sector to come through, because for McDonald's, for Tesco, for Sainsbury, for other supermarkets that were originally part of creating this amazing success, now suddenly the animal feed that supports the burgers that they're selling, the chicken, the pork, it's once again exposed to like horrible deforestation in the Amazon rainforest. And are they going to continue to do business with the likes of Cargill and Bunge that were responsible for this? That's what we're hoping to that's what we're pushing on now. And I think I will say that although, as I said, in many areas we're continuing to see success through the private sector transformation strategy. This is one example of where our work does intersect with like hostile politicians, aggressive and hostile politicians. It can interfere and make companies either more cautious or give excuse to bad actors to run away in the other direction.
So have
I
you?
will say I think that's ultimately self-defeating. And like the soy moratorium is a good example of this, because all those big soy companies have been able to sell soy from the Brazilian Amazon without much reputational risk over the last 2 decades because of the success in reducing their own success, which should be praised in reducing deforestation. Now they're going to go back to having the same toxic reputational issues that they once did, and I suspect that will limit their market access or market expansion.
So are you pressing now to have this reverted? That's
Yes, very much. And we're pressing on McDonald's specifically, but the other supermarkets as well. A bunch of them have written a letter to the companies saying that they are taking this seriously and that they would reconsider their commercial approach if there isn't change. We'll see what happens, and they will need to really back that with commercial action. So we need to absolutely keep up the pressure. I think, it is. I don't think environmental groups on their own are going to change the political challenges that we face in the world right now. Like there's, European governments in particular are facing a menace of Russia from the east, a duly and highly uncertain ally in the United States. They feel very crunched from a security perspective, and that affects their budgetary decisions. There's rising populism and related to fear of immigration. And I think these are things that are really challenging. But on the other hand, like extinction crisis, climate crisis, worse, fires, floods, drought, famine are fueling many of those crises, like increases in immigration. And so we need to tackle that. I think one of the interesting things about the environment in my entire career is that most environment solutions are either economically marginal cost to solve or actually save money. And then certainly in our experience, like reducing deforestation by channeling expansion onto degraded lands has typically boosted profits for the companies that do it.
yeah.
And so I feel like the feeling of crisis and panic amongst governments around the world has led to some very irrational decision making. In particular, in Europe, what we see right now from essentially centrists in the European Union and several governments is they are very afraid of the rising tide of right-wing populism, which they see as threatening to democracy, to their own positions, et cetera. And in an effort to appease that, they are gutting environmental protections like the EU deforestation regulation, like the nature restoration law. The strangeness of that is that I don't, from every survey I've read in Europe, and I think you could apply this to the United States and elsewhere, it's not like voters are voting for right-wing parties because they support gutting nature protection or going backwards on nature restoration. It's because of anxiety about affordability, immigration, and other issues. And weirdly, if you look at the polls, 90% of Europeans support strong environmental protection. And so the centrists are actually gutting the policies that people care about. And I think want politicians to fight for in a twisted effort, one might say, to appeal to these voters. And I don't think it will work. And so, we're trying to, within that challenging context, still mobilize individuals, mobilize businesses who see the benefit of environmental action and protection, to say to politicians, no, this is still relevant, it's still a priority, and it will help on your overall situation. Uh, and I think that's the battle that we're currently engaged in.
Yeah. I mean, clearly meat is a highly politicized subject
Yeah,
in the UK, Europe. It's people are fighting. They feel like they have a right to eat meat, and obviously, we've been eating meat for thousands and thousands of years. So it's kind of inbuilt, and so it happened here in the UK as well. There was talk about a meat tax, and the populist parties used that against the kind of administration at the time. And so people are, I mean, they do see the kind of centrist parties as kind of taking away what they think they have a right to. And that's about messaging, isn't it? I
yeah,
mean, because I don't think a lot of the people that support the sort of populist parties are really bothered about the policies, or are even aware of the policies, or even following the policies. All they hear is what is kind of shouted at them by some sort of populist leader on the news. So, I mean, how do we address that messaging, really?
yeah. Well, I wouldn't overestimate this kind of incoherence of voting behavior. People can passionately care about protecting a forest in their backyard or even wildlife over the ocean, and also say that they are really angry about immigration, or that they're really mad about the rising cost of food in the supermarket, and or just hold broadly right-wing agenda. So like when I have a background in political science, and when you look at like voters opinions, they rarely follow a unified, coherent, organized view that like major political parties do. But I think on the issue of meat, you're right. Like, meat, people seem to like eating meat more than they even like having sex. And it is, um, I used to be a big meat eater before I learned about the environmental impact, and I've cared so much about nature since I was a little kid. And once I did, I stopped eating, but I get it because I loved eating meat. And it's a source of protein. And it's also been central to, many cultures, traditions. And so I think we all get that. And, I don't think meat tax that's not what we're pushing. Like it's, it's premature at a minimum. And I hope that we can solve this challenge without resorting to food taxation. Um, so I think the challenge that we face is providing people with delicious, affordable protein that they really want to eat, that has a fraction of the environmental impact. Because right now, we're seeing, 2/3, 80% of agricultural land taken up by animals and crops that feed animals, which is extremely inefficient. I mean, you're looking at, it takes, something like 16 times the amount of land to get calories from beef as it does from a plant-based diet. It's, 6 times for turkey and 3 times for chicken. So we're using way more land than we need to. When you see images of the Amazon burning, or see the prairies destroyed in the United States, it really is because of the meat industry. And if, when you think about climate change, why is that happening? Why has it happened historically? A lot of it is because of deforestation, sending these ecosystems, turning these ecosystems into carbon that goes up into the atmosphere and makes our planet warmer. So
Yeah.
there's, yes, people want to eat meat. I don't think any of us dispute that. And then on the other hand, it is causing a huge environmental challenge. So what we our way of solving this is we are trying to scale the animal-free protein industry to the point where across product categories, it can compete with industrial meat in the marketplace. And that it can I think already there's several products for like hamburgers and chicken nuggets that I would say, basically meet that standard. But, first, there's not commonly available products right now for steak and many other products that, like, I think a meat eater would say, oh, this is equivalent. And so, in order to address that, we are looking to drive investment by the meat companies themselves, by retailers, and saying our goal is to sell, an increased amount of animal-free protein, so that drives investment in that sector, so that they're able to develop those products. I mean, keep in mind, like, this meat is $1 trillion a year industry, and that means there's a lot of investment going on right now in just making meat cheap. There's a lot of subsidies also that go to the meat industry, and they benefit from commercial practices that we've had some success in changing, that kind of further subsidize the meat industry. So when it comes to retailers, many of them offer meat as a kind of lost leader to get people into the supermarket. There's a tradition in retailers of, I saw a sign at our local supermarket here the other day, cheap chicken, CHEEP, very funny pun, for, a whole chicken for 99 cents. And it's incredibly cheap for that amount of meat. And, that's going to draw people in the supermarket, and then they're going to buy a lot of other stuff. In contrast, plant-based products are often marked up to 90%. And it makes it doubly challenging for this somewhat newer industry.
Yeah. And perhaps the kind of plant-based products aren't necessarily up to scratch, right, yet on a kind of taste and texture basis. So
Yeah, I think there are. I
I
think that's absolutely right, and that's what we're really trying to address. And there are good plant-based products. Impossible consistently scores very high in blind taste tests that people can't really tell the difference. There are many other burgers and more highly processed foods like chicken nuggets where it's indistinguishable. But across the board, I think that's true. And one of the challenges is that in 2020, 2021, particularly in the United States, where you saw brands like Impossible and Beyond succeeding, there were a lot of new product entrants because meat companies wanted to get in on the action, new startups wanted to get in the action, and the quality was highly inconsistent. And so many people had their first exposure to plant-based protein, and it wasn't that good. And so then they got turned off from the whole category, even where there were better options available. And so that's created a challenge. And then, unfortunately, many of the animal-free protein companies have seen their stock valuations decline as the growth has stagnated in the United States, particularly. It's still growing in Europe and Asia, but not quite at the, double-digit rates it was.
Okay.
And so here's how we're, one of the things that we're trying to do to overcome this challenge is really focus on blends. So, we think about the challenge of animal-free protein primarily as like persuading people to shift to eating a pure plant-based product. And that's really good for the environment. It's really good for animals. It has a lot of benefits. But I think because so many people like eating meat, even if they acknowledge the issues with it, they're not going to all do that right away. Like, not everybody's going to become a vegan overnight. So what companies can do and are doing is mixing in 10, 20, 50% of an animal-free protein, like could be seaweed, could be peas, lots of other ingredients into traditional burgers or chicken. And it is, sometimes they call it plant boosted or protein boosted. They typically get more protein per weight and other health benefits from it. And that can actually be cheaper. And so there's been, Purdue, a big chicken company here in the United States, many retail brands in Europe have done this. And actually, because, right now you're talking about only a like single-digit percentage of people who are willing to consistently have purely plant-based products, mixing in 20%, 30% animal-free protein into a traditional burger actually gets you way bigger impact in terms of reducing meat consumption it also provides investment to companies like Better Meat Company and others who are really focused on scaling these industries. So, and it creates a market that the meat companies and investors can see. So that's one of the things where we think it's available right now. It doesn't diminish taste at all, according to blind taste surveys, and has the same experience, and people are still eating meat. So that's a big focus of ours. Indeed, I just mentioned in the Netherlands, at the I think it was the like Grand Prix auto race. They wanted to reduce their environmental footprint, and so they just started mixing in seaweed with the burgers that they were selling. And they didn't tell anybody, which I don't think is normally how you would go about it, but that's what they did. And they had, as they call them, petrol heads, who they said don't care about their audience. They said do not care about the environment at all, but we still needed to reduce our footprint. And they found nobody noticed that they were eating burgers that had seaweed in them. So it just showed that, like, people are willing to accept the idea that part of the burger is seaweed or whatever, mycoprotein. They seem
Yeah.
perfectly happy to eat it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I personally think that is one of the most pragmatic ways of reducing meat, and I hope I that in sort of 5 years from now or sooner, it'll be quite uncommon maybe to find 100% meat burger in the supermarket, or that would be deemed as a kind of luxury item, and kind of most of the time it'll be 50-50, 60-40 mixed
Yeah.
with kind of mycoproteins or various other things. So yes, I agree with you that I think that's the way, and that will be one of the panels actually at the conference, to sort of talk about blending foods. So that'd be good. I mean, you were at COP 30 at the end of
Yeah.
last year. I mean, I know it was COP 28 when they came up with the food roadmap, and I don't think much has happened in that regard since. I mean, did you feel like there was any movement with that?
Um, sorry. Okay, I'll see you later. Sorry. Okay, amazing. All right. Sorry about the interruption.
That's great. Yeah.
Uh the um
I'm sorry.
so
Again,
the food roadmap,
yeah.
I think, unfortunately, those kinds of broad commitments, not just on food, but on many topics related to climate, too often turn into lowest common denominator exercises.
Excuse me.
And I think that is been accurate for the food roadmap. Uh, we have seen much more progress from individual companies taking action, often under pressure from the campaigns that we and others launch, uh, or smart companies trying to get ahead of things and be real leaders and expand markets. So, well, I don't object to like diplomatic statements by any means. I think they're great. I think their track record has been limited in terms of delivering results. We've seen much more impact from creating a race to the top dynamic where companies feel like the baseline has to be zero deforestation, selling higher quantities of animal-free protein, reducing their methane impact. And that is the dynamic that industry after industry has worked and that we're trying to replicate. So
Okay.
we spend less time fussing about the in principle statements at big summits and more time looking at what individual companies are doing and most importantly delivering.
How did you find the attitude at COP 30? Did you find them quite kind of open and or quite hostile?
Well, the climate summits are populated mostly by environmentalists, indigenous people. Like there are, governments who reflect the politics of their countries, and there's a limited number of corporate lobbyists there. So I think in terms of participants, yeah, very supportive, extremely so. I think people who go there recognize the severe climate crisis and the fact that, just because the politician's eye is on other issues doesn't mean that Texas here in the United States or Vermont, where I spend my summers in the northeastern United States, don't go up in flames over the summer. Like that hasn't disappeared. And or much of Europe now experiencing insane fires during the summertime. So I think there's a recognition that remains very urgent. Outside of these climate summits, unfortunately, and on the front pages of the world's media, it's at the moment not as big an issue. I'm sure it'll come back. I have great confidence it'll come back. And I would say part of that is affected by the United States, which remains, such a powerful country, leader in the world. But our leader right now is gutting climate protection, and so much of the world, wisely or unwisely, looks to the U.S. for leadership on everything. And when we're not providing it or moving in the exact opposite direction, I feel like too many governments don't have the courage yet to chart their own course and do what's right in the absence of U.S. action and leadership. I think there really needs to be an adjustment to the strange new world that we live in.
Yes, for sure. So, which do you think has been your most successful campaign, and how how was it successful? What was the technique that made it successful?
Well, I think the biggest impact, certainly, that we've had has been breaking the link between agricultural expansion, deforestation in Southeast Asia and parts of the Congo Basin by changing the palm oil industry, the rubber industry, and with others, the paper industry. It was, a decade ago, you were seeing 1 million acres of deforestation a year for palm oil alone. And that, it was forests filled with orangutans and Sumatran tigers and elephants just being incinerated, bulldozed every year. And the conventional wisdom was that this was inevitable. This was happening in Asia and starting to happen in Africa. The companies doing it didn't care. Most of their markets were in developing Asia, similar to the meat industry, where, governments, populists didn't care that much about sustainability, was at least the thinking, and where consumers were very price sensitive. And so they weren't willing to pay more for sustainable palm oil or paper or rubber or whatever. Our analysis was, like, just to put a finer point on that, you look at palm oil, 2% of the market is in the United States, 15% in Europe. So, maybe 20%, 25% total in developed markets that have some history of caring about sustainability. And so how are you going to tackle that? So what we found was that actually, for the Asian companies that dominated those industries, the West was their emerging market. They wanted to expand market share there, so they were exposed to sustainability concerns in other countries. Second, many people in Asian markets do actually care about the environment, often more than people in the West. And then third, that there were a handful of companies, the agricultural traders, that really sat astride those industries, that were very exposed to influence from their investors, from their customers all over the world. They really cared about customers from developed economies because they were more stable. They were less subject to random tariff swings. They didn't know it was coming from the United States. So they prized the stability there. And that gave us a lot of leverage. And so we launched, these perfect storm campaigns. Kellogg's was a big partner of Wilmar, which is the dominant palm oil company. And in Michigan, we had thousands of volunteers go to Kellogg's recruiters on campuses at universities and say, we don't want to work for you as long as you're in bed with this company that's destroying the rainforest. Volunteers put up lawn signs in neighborhoods where Kellogg's executives lived. Investors in Kellogg's went on their earnings calls and said, why are you risking your multi-billion-dollar brand by a partnership with a company that's killing Sumatran tigers that are the inspiration for Tony the Tiger? What would Tony say? And had people wearing t-shirts saying that. What would Tony say? And many other things around the world. And then also, I reached out to the CEO of Wilmar to say, we have a practical solution. You should channel your development onto degraded lands instead of into pristine rainforests. And the combination of those things made him receptive to that. And so when I went to Singapore to sit down with him, and he met with me, to his credit, he was very open-minded about the fact that they could totally change the way they do business and change their requirements for all their suppliers. And once we got that company, the by far the largest to adopt strong no deforestation policies, within a year, we and our allies were able to get all the other major players in the industry to do so. Yeah. And then that wasn't enough. There were still rogue actors trying to evade it. many of them based in different parts of Asia, that we had to figure out financial and public levers to affect. And we also found that, unsurprisingly, a few years after those commitments were made, there were still suppliers engaged in 50,000 hectares of deforestation, still supplying them. And so we set up a satellite monitoring system that's operates to this day, where both in Southeast Asia and now in the meat industry in South America, we monitor over 50 million hectares of the agricultural frontier every quarter and file alerts with the world's largest agribusinesses to get them to tackle it. So in Southeast Asia and Africa, it really succeeded. The combination of all those things succeeded in driving a 90% reduction in deforestation. Indonesia, the largest country in that region, has had the lowest deforestation levels on record for the last several years. We want to keep it that way and stop some new threats like state-backed development. But we're trying to replicate that model in the meat industry, both to eliminate deforestation. We've had some progress. We've gotten almost 1,000 suppliers cut off by JBS and Minerva and Marfrig for links to deforestation, but unfortunately, there's still more out there. We've gotten new methane commitments to reduce methane and new commitments to boost all proteins, animal-free protein sales from Carrefour, from Ahold Delhaize, and many others. And so I wouldn't say we've achieved the sort of dramatic success that we did in Southeast Asia yet, but it feels like we're partway there.
Okay, great. I mean, you must be quite buoyant on the potential of cultivated meat and sort of cellular agriculture as a whole. I spoke with Jim Mellon a couple of weeks ago, and one of their companies, the Good Food Group, makes palm oil, and they're producing hundreds of thousands of liters already, and kind of Jim is very buoyant, thinking it's going to be the kind of largest producer of palm oil in the world, and that's quite soon. He's saying it's producing it now, and it obviously doesn't need the same kind of regulatory hurdles as kind of meat and things, but yeah, so that could be a useful solution. So what's your view on sort of cellular agriculture as a solution?
Yeah, really exciting. I think it has a lot of potential. And, we should acknowledge it's at very small scale right now. So hundreds of thousands of liters of palm oil is great, but we're talking the market there of millions and millions of tons. But from small things, transformation emerges. So we are very supportive of that. And if you could dramatically reduce the land footprint required for vegetable oil, that would be a huge win. And but really, when it comes to meat, I think cellular agriculture production, cultivated meat is exciting. It offers the promise of serving meat that's actually meat, but with a tiny fraction of the footprint on land, on water, without animal slaughter. So in principle, it's the most exciting approach. They need to scale, and they need to figure out how to produce affordably meat at large quantities. They're making incredible progress. When they made the first cultivated burger, a single burger cost about $300,000 to produce, and now it's I think like $12 a pound, they're saying, which is the price of
depends who you ask, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a price of like a nice cut of steak. So it's getting lower. They're not producing it at large scale yet, it should be said, but if they can show some breakthroughs and deliver consumer products, which they're not really there's very, very few places anywhere in the world where you can go out and actually buy cultivated meat. I've been to Singapore there's a butcher store there that sells like a 97% plant-based burger with 3% cultivated. And I've been to tastings of cultivated meat, and it's really good. I've had salmon and chicken, and it's really, the quality is high. The experience is similar or identical to meat. So they need to have great products produced at scale, and they need investment to do that.
Sure.
So from our perspective, the way to get that investment is to demonstrate demand. Have supermarkets say, we're going to sell 50, 60% animal-free protein by 2030. And that will create a clear market signal to investors that there is somebody who wants to buy this stuff.
Mm.
Um, and that, because we need to drive more and more investment into these companies that are working on it.
For sure. Yes. It's
It's
about
like the early days of solar. It's like I lived through that, like trying to scale solar. I was quite involved in that in the early days, and it was mocked by policymakers and politicians, and culturally as very fringy. But once they got started talking about billions of dollars of investment, they began to scale, and now you have a situation where new solar and wind, geothermal is cheaper than fossil fuels.
it's about the messaging as well, isn't it, with cultivated meat? Because almost without exception, everyone I mentioned to uh, who haven't heard of sort of cellular agriculture and cultivated meat, and I mention it to them, they screw their face up and think it's a disgusting idea. So it's kind of different from solar in that regard because it's kind of visceral, isn't it? It's kind of
Yeah,
emotional as well as what some people might have been kind of misinformed as impractical or something. So
yeah.
it's a different kind of messaging with the cultivated meat.
I think that's right, but I also think that is overcomable. So, it's like a self-driving car. People, I actually haven't been in one, but I was in San Francisco recently, and they're all over the place, and like it was crazy experience to have one just stop for you as you're crossing the street. And I looked, and this car that stopped had no driver in it, and that's normal there. And I think most people haven't had the opportunity to just sample cultivated meat because it's produced in such small quantities. So they're just thinking about it as something strange and new. But the reality is, if you put it to people like, okay, try it, it's just as good. It costs the same, and you don't have to torture and slaughter billions of animals a year to produce your food. You don't have to bulldoze the rainforest for it. You don't have to poison the water. Like, it's pretty gross how meat is made right now. And there's
Yeah.
a lot of risk of antimicrobial resistance, of fecal contamination that you don't really have with cultivated meat. So
Mm.
I don't think it's totally a theoretical issue right now because like people don't have the opportunity to buy it and try it. And so I hope that when it actually comes to market, that will start to change. And then, you do have countries like China, um, obviously already Israel, Singapore, Arab countries that are so heavily dependent on imports of meat and feed that they have huge strategic benefits from having a different source, a more diverse source of meat that requires lower resources. So for them, I think you will have a huge state incentive to invest in those industries and support it, and not be reliant on the how severe the climate changes in the Brazilian Cerrado affecting their ability to nourish their population.
Yeah.
And so I think once we hit that breakthrough point for cultivated, I think you will start to see massive investment. We're not there yet. And I would say in the meantime, like you can get a lot of the benefits from existing animal-free protein, from plant-based protein, from mycoprotein,
Mm.
and so we need to broadly build every approach that has lower impacts on the planet, doesn't torture, kill animals, and we just need scale.
Yeah. So one last question, Glenn, before I let you go and get to your daughter, is so over the next couple of years, what would Mighty Earth see as a success? What's on your horizon that you're hoping to achieve in the next couple of years?
Well, within this area, our goal is to get to 10% animal-free protein. There's different ways to calibrate that. So like in the United States, that's usually use those kinds of goals where you're looking at like actual substitute for meat. In Europe, they talk about like plant-based sales, which are 50 or 60%. But we're from a global perspective, if we could displace 10% of meat with animal-free protein, we think that would be the breakthrough point that really allows these industries to scale. The cool thing about that is, once you get to significantly replacing meat, you can rewild hundreds of millions or billions of acres of land. That will both create habitat for endangered species like sloths and jaguars, but also the regrowth of forests and land currently occupied by the meat industry will suck literally gigatons of carbon out of the atmosphere. Like you're looking at potentially like taking 90+% of the carbon that we need out of the planet if we can drive this change out of the atmosphere, if we can drive this change. So that is it's a big success. It's very ambitious, but it's what we're looking to achieve. In the shorter term, we're looking to break the link between agriculture and deforestation permanently, reduce methane pollution by 30%, and in some ecosystems bring back important animals like mountain lions. So we have big plans, but like really the most transformative thing that we can do over, if you're looking to 2040, 2050 is scale animal-free protein.
Okay, so you want to reduce meat. You want to reduce meat eating by, I mean, clearly not by 10% because it's already, or yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's the near-term goal. The
Okay.
10%, we believe that if you can, if you're reducing it by 10% with animal-free protein, then that industry is getting the scale that they need to really supercharge and have a transformative impact where you're getting to 80-90% shift from industrial meat towards animal-free protein that has dramatically less impact.
That's probably going to happen quite naturally anyway because of kind of Generation Z and the kind of younger generation are eating less meat maybe than the older generation anyway, right?
I hope you're right. I think there's the trend globally, unfortunately, has been, collectively has been rising meat consumption every year as countries get richer. So
Yeah.
I think, in Europe, I think there are trends like that. I don't know if that's true in the United States, to the degree to which that's true in the United States, and in Asia, particularly developing Asian countries. The meat eating is widespread and often seen as a sign of prosperity. So I think there, yes, you're absolutely right. Like among a lot of people, they do starting to recognize that as particularly young people, but I also think we have a lot of work to do.
Okay. Well, it's been lovely talking to you, Glenn, and I'm going to let you go. We are almost at our limit. So wonderful talking to you. Thank you for coming on Future Foods Interviews.
Thank you, Alex. This is great.